Hello and welcome to another edition of the Osceola's Nole, Your Enemy Opponent preview. My name is Pat Burnham, and I'm going to be joined today by the publisher of Deacons Illustrated, Conor O'Neill, who will get us up to speed on all we need to know about the Wake Forest Demon Deacons as they get ready to head to Tallahassee on Saturday afternoon for a big ACC matchup against Florida State. Well, first of all, Connor, thanks for joining us. I know it's a very busy week up there in Winston-Salem as 21st ranked Wake Forest, 3-1, gets ready to head to Florida State, 4-0, ranked 22nd, and I believe they're 22nd, 23rd in the other poll, but ranked right next to each other. It's the biggest game we've had in Tallahassee in quite some time. I think the last ranked on ranked matchup was Virginia Tech when Willie Taggart took over the program his first game. I don't think Florida State's been ranked since. Obviously, Wake Forest coming off a double overtime loss to Clemson and really a game it could have won. I don't think many people gave it a chance. I actually picked them, I will say that, in our Osceola tailgate. But, just tell us, we'll get into offense and defense, but Wake Forest is 3-1, coming off a very emotional game against Clemson, as they always are for all the ACC teams that are trying to, put a dent in Clemson's domination over the league. Obviously, Wake Forest did that last year with winning the ACC Atlantic. But anyway, just your overall thoughts on Wake Forest at 3-1 right now.
Yeah, they're the mantra is always it's a 1 week season. I think that anybody would be lying if they said they're not a little down. Like you don't pour everything that you have into winning a game like that and lose in double overtime, a game that you can literally go back and look at any one single play and say, hey, if we do this differently, we can do that differently, then we're not in overtime, we win in regulation. You can also do vice versa. Like if we don't make this play, then we're not even in overtime and we're losing in regulation, that kind of thing. But it'll drive you crazy. Last year, Wake won the Atlantic without beating Clemson. It was kind of, they're the exception to the old WWE thing of to be the man, you got to beat the man.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think they really wanted last week. They've got to figure out a way to refill the tank. Because I'll admit, going into the season, I've been a Florida State skeptic for 3 or 4 years now. Like I'd like to think that I was early on the train of, it seemed like they'd have a little bit of early season momentum, and even in the preseason, like people say, oh, Florida State's going to get back, and it's like I'm not going to believe that until they actually show it. And I've kind of come around. Like I've watched, the Friday night game against Louisville was nicely timed, and I got to watch that. And then the Boston College game, I was already home on Saturday from Clemson, so I was able to watch that too. They're good. They're legit now. So I did not have this game on my radar as like a Wake is going to be going into the gauntlet with these 2 games back to back. But now, this is you emptied the tank last week, and now you got to refill it and bring everything that you brought against Clemson is going to have to be there against Florida State too.
Yeah, and listen, I can remember Coach Bowden saying the years when he was at Florida State that it is very difficult to have all of your frontline guys, your starters, your 2 deep, all hitting on all cylinders each and every week, right? It's an emotional game, peaks and valleys through the season. Now, Wake Forest does have a very veteran football team for the most part. Do you think that gives it some resiliency in coming back? I mean, Florida State's still one of the bigger brands in the ACC, if not the biggest brand. Teams still get fired up to play Florida State. Do you think the fact that you are playing Florida State helps them move on and pass Clemson?
Yeah, I think so. Like you said, Wake, I mean, specifically on the offense, like if you're looking for a young player making contributions on offense, the youngest guys that are out there are 3rd-year players.
Yeah.
Like when your youngest players are 20 and 21-year-olds, man, they're such a veteran group. There's not much that can get them off kilter. Not saying they can't. Like that they're not invincible by any stretch, but yeah, and they'll be up to play Florida State. Like again, this is something that never came out going into last season's game. But Florida State, week 3 last year was 0-2, and playing a 2-0 Wake Forest team that Wake's first 2 games showed nothing. I think Florida State was a 3 or 4 point favorite in that game in Winston-Salem.
Yeah, and
And
I still,
that,
to be honest with you, I do not understand how that was the case last year.
I mean, neither did Wake's players, and they used that. Like they, you know, without getting into specifics, they were aware that Florida State was a favorite in that game. They wanted to go out and prove that how silly that was. And they went out and won by 21. And
Yeah, and a game that really was really never in question. Florida State, I mean, had some early success in that game, and then Wake Forest just really seemed to dominate. Florida State was
yeah,
turnover prone in that game. I think they played 2 quarterbacks. I think Jordan and McKenzie both played in that game. All right, but all right. So you mentioned the offense, and of course that's where it begins and ends for Wake Forest right now. You've got arguably the best quarterback in the ACC at the controls, and they certainly seem to be a different offense under Sam Hartman. But they're 14th in scoring offense. I think he is the 8th leading passer in the nation, the top passer in the ACC entering this week. Just tell us a little bit about, the difference in the Wake Forest offense when Sam Hartman is in the game and when he's not, and just your overall thoughts on where he is as he's in his senior year, as he's playing as good as he ever has.
yeah. I would say the Clemson game, given the opponent, given the circumstance, was his career best. 6 touchdowns and no interceptions. That's, you don't have to comb through the stats to find out that he was really on fire. Sustained, like saying this is the best football of his career. He was not very good against Liberty. He said that he gave himself a D in the post game. He had a really terrible 3rd quarter against Liberty. And, the fun part is his 3rd quarter against Clemson was something like 8 for 9 for 150 or, some kind of yardage and 3 touchdowns. And it felt like he could not miss. Like he got into a rhythm, and it felt like any handoff that was called or that he made on an option was a bad play because of how much of a rhythm passer he is. And when he gets in that groove, you just want to see him floating the ball out there to your 6'4" and 6'5" receivers and hitting them in stride. So Sam has been the heartbeat of Wake Forest for the last 3 seasons. It's not necessarily, I've written this, it's not necessarily a they go as he goes. Like, even the Liberty game, he was not on point for all of that game and they still won it.
Right.
But he is the heartbeat and soul of this program for 3 years. When they're up, he's up. When they're down, it's usually because he's not playing maybe his best. So he's the key. Like it's not any secret. Wake Forest runs a spread option RPO, and he's making one of 3 decisions on a lot of plays. And he hasn't kept the ball very much because, Wake Forest has decent running backs, and they've got receivers that, they've got 3 wide receivers and 2 slot receivers that they feel comfortable throwing to in any situation, any routes, get the ball in their hands and let them work.
Yeah, and I want to get to the receivers because you look at the stats and really tremendous the way he's able to spread the ball around to a lot of very talented wideouts. This is just not the A.T. Perry show. But I want to go back to the run game real quick. Obviously, the way they run that option offense, the mesh, the delayed mesh, which kind of resembles the old time delayed draw, but just a different way of doing it. How much does Sam Hartman help that running game and the way he's able to carry? Because, I mean, he will walk up to the line of scrimmage with that ball in his hand. I mean, it's hard to duplicate in practice, and I would imagine it's hard for the other Wake Forest quarterbacks to master. It's not the easiest thing in the world. I mean, there's a lot going on besides you're making decisions. Do I give? Do I keep? Do I throw? And then you're right up at the line of scrimmage with a bunch of 300-pound behemoths on both sides of the ball. Just tell us a little bit about how he activates the run game.
Yeah, it's I've got a theory that is probably too early to really flesh out and put numbers with, but I think Sam is not running nearly as often as he has in the past. It's so difficult to peg Wake's offense because they'll just take what the defense gives them. And that's what you saw in the second half of the Clemson game. In the third quarter, Clemson was playing man on the outsides, and Wake threw the ball downfield because they felt great about one-on-one matchups. In the fourth quarter, Clemson switched and said, okay, we're dropping our safeties off the line, and that's why Wake ran the ball. And that's why they were ripping off 6, 7, 8 yard runs, seemingly most plays. So that RPO, the spread option, it's all in Sam's hands. And the backs like Justice Ellison and Christian Turner are the main two. Quentin Cooley didn't play against Clemson, and we'll see what his status is. He's different. He's a little more powerful of a runner. And I would think they kind of would need him. I thought they needed him against Clemson a little bit, but I mean, the running game is, they're not going to run for 200 to 300 yards a game. Like, this is not, they had that in 2019 when Jamie Newman was at the helm. They had a power runner, and they had power runners with Cade Carney, Kenneth Walker III.
Yep.
The strength of this offense is definitely through the air. And until you drop both safeties off the line, until you give them a run box, they're going to throw it more often than they're going to run it.
Yeah, it seems like they get a 5-man box, you're going to see a lot of runs. If they get a 6-man box, they're going to. I think it's a lot depending on what coverage he reads, and then obviously if it's 7-man, he's throwing. But yeah, interesting. I want to ask you this. That Clemson came in with supposedly the best defensive front in all of college football. And they probably are right up there in the top 5. I don't think anybody will doubt that. Their numbers bear. I think they're 8th in the country in run defense. Wake Forest has struggled a little bit statistically running the ball. But they did run for over 100 yards, which is not tremendous, but it is probably a little bit more validation in its run game because it came against Clemson, and specifically because it was effective in keeping them in the game and and getting a tie in the ball game and taking it in overtime. How much do you think that Wake Forest offensive line, which has 192 career games, do you think that gives it any more confidence, and Dave Clawson any more confidence in his run game heading into a Florida State game?
Yeah, I mean, they love the experience up front. The youngest player is 4th year. I think right tackle Devontae Gordon, and he's actually the same class as their 5th year center Michael Juergens. He just gray shirted because he had a season-ending injury in his last year of high school football, and didn't come to campus until the semester later. But yeah, they love the experience up front. The run game's success against Clemson was particularly, a point of pride for Wake and for the program, because they did not run the ball against Liberty with any
At
success.
all. No, at all.
I think it was 26 carries for 21 yards and a little bit of sack yardage in there, but it was also just, a running back making 2 jump cuts in the backfield to only get a 1-yard loss. It was just, there was nothing. And Dave Clawson even admitted after the game that they abandoned the run sometime in the second half. They just said, all right, we're not trying this anymore. We can't. So that was a big game. That was a big story last week. I wrote about that kind of in depth with, if you can't block Liberty's front, how in the world are you ever going to block Clemson's front? But they held up. They weren't perfect, but you're never going to be perfect when you've got all due respect to the guys on Wake's line, but you're asking a lot if you're asking them to hold up every single play against Breesy, Tyler Davis, Ruko Horoho. Miles Murphy is a beast. KJ Henry played really well in his homecoming game. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think there's an offensive line. I know there's not an offensive line in the ACC that can hold up for 4 quarters and block those guys every single play. I don't know if there's one in the country that can do that.
Well, it definitely was not eye-popping statistically, 110 yards, I believe it was, but so I mean, but it was effective in what they were trying to do on offense. It certainly helped set up some of the success in the passing game. And listen, let's talk about that passing game. Everyone talks about A.T. Perry, and they certainly should. One of the best receivers in the ACC, if not the best receiver in the ACC, and there are a lot of really good wide receivers in the conference this year. AT has 16 catches for 273 yards, but you also have four other receivers who have at least 10 catches. Jamal Banks with 15, Donovan Green with 14, Keyshawn Williams with 10, and then Taylor Moran with 16. Just talk about either any of those guys that you think help complement Perry and just their ability and what they bring to the offense.
Oh man, Jamal Banks is the one with 2 touchdowns in each of the last 2 games, and he's been phenomenal. And his track is a little fun, for lack of a better word. Like, he looked fantastic last year in fall camp. Like, he was making all these catches, contested, crazy diving catches, one-handed catches. He looked like he was going to be a star. And then you get into the season and he's playing, 8 to 10 snaps a game. And you're like, Dave, we saw this guy in fall camp. He looked like a future ACC star. What's the deal? He's like, well, you saw the highlights and you saw the flash, but Dave has these funny ways of kind of telling you that, yeah, you're the reporter, we're the coach. We know what we're seeing a little better than you do. It's like, he wasn't consistent. He was, on a simple running play, he'd miss a block, or on another route, he'd run the wrong route. So he needed to build the consistency, and that's the element that showed up this year. And actually, like, in fall camp, I was writing, he was having a lot more quiet of a fall camp than he did last year. And then we go ask Dave now. It's like, Dave, Jamal seemed to be better in last year's fall camp, and he seemed to be making a lot more big plays than this year. Like, are you concerned that he's regressed? And Dave's like, well, no, he's right where we need him to be. And so it's validation, it's vindication of, the coach kind of knows what he's talking about a little more than a dipshit with a notepad, right? So,
well, listen, you got a pretty good head coach up there.
Right. So that's a little bit of Dave Clawson, like, hey, Conor, I know you think you know what you're talking about, but we really know what we're talking about. So Jamal, it's fun to watch his development. I mean, he's from DC. He transferred to St. Francis Academy in Baltimore, which is they've sprung up in the last 6 or 7 years as one of the premier high schools in the country for high school football. Shout out to my hometown there in Baltimore. But he transferred up there, and that, I remember talking to Jamal last fall camp, that he only spent like 3 or 4 months at St. Francis because he early enrolled at Wake right before the pandemic in 2020. Those 3 or 4 months he spent at St. Francis were crucial to his development. And he, the old saying about when you practice against really good players, you get really good. He was practicing against a bunch of Division I prospects. Like, I think the Boston College, their second or third year nickelback was on that team. He was playing against him every day in practice. I can't remember the name. But there's guys like that at St. Francis. And when you're able to, the old iron sharpens iron, that's where he really developed. And then he's gotten to Wake and developed further.
All right. Well, one more question about the offense. And we mentioned this before we started taping. what they do best is throw the ball, but Coach Clawson has been consistent, and he's going to try to run the ball, right? I mean, y'all had Wake Forest has run the ball 53% of the time versus passing just 47%. Now, some of that may be skewed by the VMI game where they took a big lead, and we're only 4 weeks into the season, so stats still can be funny to read, right? I mean, it's hard to know which ones count, which ones don't in some regards. But what does that tell you about the offense and what they're trying to accomplish, that they continue to be dedicated to running the ball, despite the fact that they don't run for huge gains or big averages?
It just tells me the defense dictates so much of what Wake is doing with the football. And I wrote about this a little bit. I film review every game. I think there's a little bit of an identity crisis with Wake's offense because you have this stud quarterback, you have these star receivers. If you put it out there on tape, if you put it out there that any team can just rush 3 and drop 8, and you're going to run the ball and you're going to take the ball out of Sam Hartman's hands, you're going to limit the touches that you get those 5 receivers. You're kind of letting the defense dictate what you do, which is fine. Like, if you have that kind of faith in your running system and your running backs, and you think you can run for 300 yards and beat teams, then so be it. But it's really something I'm very, very curious to see how it shapes up against Florida State. Like, I want to know if Florida State kind of does the same thing that Clemson does with, okay, we're going to drop our safeties back, and we know that we're going to win enough running plays. Like, we're going to get you off schedule eventually. We're not going to give up the 20 to 25 chunk yards. We're just, your good runs are only going to be 8 or 9 yards. And then eventually we're going to get you off schedule and make you throw it. And you're going to have to throw it against defenses that you typically don't want to throw against.
Yeah. I think it's going to be fascinating to see how they attack Florida State. I really do. I think they'll stay committed to the run game, or regardless of what it produces, to help open up and keep FSU's defense honest and open up, obviously, one-on-one or big play matchups with A.T. Perry, Jamal Banks. Obviously, Keyshawn Williams and the rest of the receivers there. Want to flip over to defense real quick. A new defensive coordinator who's not new to Wake Forest, Brad Lambert, who was with Jim Grove at Wake Forest, and then I believe went on to be the first head coach at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. I believe he was the first coach. But anyway, well respected within the community, coaching community. Has had a very, very solid career as a defensive coach. They're kind of, in most statistical categories, are mid-pack to back 75% of the college football. However, they do make big plays. They're in the top 25 in tackles for losses and top 25 for sacks. I believe they're 22nd in the nation in sacks, if I'm not mistaken, and right around 24th in tackles for losses. Actually, it's the other way around: 24th in sacks, 22nd in TFLs, 11 sacks, 29 TFLs. How has Coach Lambert changed? And obviously, this is a defense is still going through its evolution, as most teams are. But what has he brought to the Wake Forest defense? And they are giving up big yards, throwing the ball 237 yards per game, but they are getting to the quarterback. They are making plays behind the line of scrimmage. Are they doing a lot of blitzing, zone blitz, man blitz? Kind of what's he brought to that defense this year?
It's a little more, the generic term is, I think they're more attacking in style. We did not see much of it against Clemson, but in the first 3 games, we see a lot of, a third down and obvious passing downs. They'd line up 3 down linemen and then 3 mid-level guys and bring 1, 2, or all 3 of the mid-levels. And that confused Vanderbilt. That resulted in some big plays against Liberty. They did, like I said, they didn't do it very much against Clemson. One of the big keys going into this game is whether Kalen Carson plays. He's their best corner. He missed the Clemson game, and they get really thin in the secondary. Like it's not just a 1 year theme. The last several years, when Wake has one or two guys go down in the secondary, and they get thin and they start calling defenses and putting in schemes to kind of guard against what they think is going to happen. So they're out there playing their second and third corners. They're on their second nickel because their starting nickel was Kobe Davis, and he tore an ACL against Vanderbilt. They were down one safety, Brendan Harris, against Clemson. He was originally thought to be out for like at least a month. He might be back for this game. Like, it was a, freak. He's going to be back a lot quicker than expected. He still might miss this game, but they're thin in the secondary, man. And so I think that's why the defense they played against Clemson was a little different than what we saw in the first three games. Like, they were a lot more willing to dial up some blitzes in the first three. They did not want to put anybody on an island that they had to against Clemson. And then the times that they had to put guys on islands against Clemson, you had DJU throwing just pure dimes to receivers that are finally ready to step up for Clemson. It looks like with Ngata and Bo Collins had big games, and their tight end Davis Allen is a freak. Like, they're going to be problems for a lot of teams.
Yeah, DJ definitely looked like what we've told he could look like on Saturday against Wake Forest. To go back to how Coach Lambert has 14 players have at least one or more tackles for loss, and they're bringing them from everywhere, right? I mean, you got a safety, Malik, I believe is a safety, Malik Mustafa.
Yep.
27 tackles, leads the team, which is no surprise. A lot of strong safeties, free safeties lead their team in tackles, particularly in today's spread offenses. But more impressive is he's got four and a half tackles for a loss, which leads the team, and 2.5 sacks, which is second on the team. He's also got 2 forced fumbles and a quarterback hurry, so he's making plays all over the field. And then, of course, you've got I believe it's Kobe Turner. He's been very active on the front. 4 tackles for a loss. He's got a sack. But just talk about some of the key players on defense, guys that you anticipate that would have to have big games in order for Wake Forest to be successful against Florida State.
Those are definitely two of the big ones with, even though everybody else I've ever seen with this name is Malik, I think that's pronounced Malik.
Okay.
So Malik and Kobe, they're both Richmond transfers, interesting enough. Malik is in his second year. Kobe is in his first at Wake. They're Dave Clawson didn't have a lot of initial success in the transfer portal, but in the last 2 or 3 years of it, they've done great in the portal. Those two kids, I mean, if you kind of shudder to think what would Wake's defense look like without those two kind of up the middle with safety and defensive tackle. The one to keep an eye on is Rondell Bothroyd. He's their defensive end. He's playing the same position that Duke Ejiofor and Boogie Basham played in the last 6 or 7 years. Both of those guys were draft picks. I think Rondell is a draft pick. Like, he's a 5th round guy or 5th year guy. Not trying to drop him to the 5th round, but he's really good, man. He's playing. It's also the same position in Brad Lambert's defense that George Karlaftis became a 1st round pick at Purdue last year. So Rondell he's not just a pass rusher. He's not just a run stopper. He's both. He's a good blend of being able to diagnose. He's got a great motor like Boogie, and he's got pass rush moves. Like, he was, the times that they were only bringing 3 or 4 against Clemson, he was usually the one that was speeding up DJ's clock if anybody was able to get there. They weren't able to get there enough, but he was the one that if it was going to happen, it was going to have to be him. So he's definitely one to watch for, number 40. He's a good blend of size and speed. He's like 6'4", 270, I think they list him as.
Yeah, I think most people are expecting a close game, which means special teams could be a factor. How good is the Wake Forest kicking game, particularly field goals and punting?
Field goals is interesting, right? You had the most accurate kicker in NCAA history leave last year in Nick Skiba, and I've been writing that there's going to come a game or two this year where they're really going to miss Nick, and Matthew Dennis has proven that wrong so far. He hasn't missed a kick yet. He's, you know, he's perfect. So what else can you say about him? I don't know that he has the strongest leg. Dave typically doesn't attempt 50-yard field goals or longer. It's an analytics game with him. So we'll see if it comes down to that. I don't know, depending on the wind direction, maybe that'll be in the cards. Maybe they'll be even less receptive to taking a long field goal. Punting, they're decent. I mean, Ivan Mora is I think in his third year as their starting punter. He's able to do some things with the ball. He's not gonna garner any punt god stuff or any of that, any kind of monikers to go with like yet, but he's good. Kickoffs is the one area where they sky kick to Clemson pretty much every time. They did not want to get beat by Will Shipley taking a long one back. And then it ended up burning them because, Clemson, they were sky kicking opposite side of Shipley to somewhere between the 10 and 20. And it was Drew Sweeney catching the ball for every kickoff. And then all of a sudden, the last kickoff that Wake did, it was Antonio Williams, their freshman slot, who's probably going to be a star in the slot for Clemson. And he ran it back to midfield. So that was interesting to watch.
Nice little in-game adjustment by Dabo.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason Dabo is, 135-19 or whatever his record is at Clemson, and he has 2 national championships. So, yeah, that was a really interesting chess move to kind of track. We'll see. Like, I don't know enough about Florida State's return game to know if Wake will be that much on the edge and that unwilling to kick deep. But it's an area of the game where you don't just go to the bathroom when Wake Forest is kicking off. Like, it's very much a focal point for fans and for if you're covering the team.
Yeah, they might do some sky kicks this week after watching Trey Benson return the opener.
That's right. I flipped the game on, and that was the first thing I saw, and it was like, oh, this is going to be that kind of game.
Yeah. Well, that was game was over before it started. I'm afraid Boston College is going through some tough times right now. That offensive line is pretty beat up. You feel bad for old Jerkin because he's getting the living crap beat out of him on a weekly basis. But I was glad to see that had not changed against Florida State. All right, so we wake up or we go home on Saturday evening after this game. What is the key to a Wake Forest win as far as you're concerned?
It's going to be cliche. It might be a little bit of a cop out, but I think turnover margin is one where it'll be kind of crucial. There were no turnovers in the Wake Clemson game, and it's so fun to go back and rewatch it. It's so fun to go back and rewatch and note, that there's not a turnover in the game, but you note how many close plays almost ended up in turnovers. Like, both teams had a first quarter fumble. Wake's scored it out of bounds, and Clemson's just rolled back to an offensive lineman who was trailing the play. I don't think Wake Forest plays its second turnover-free game in a row. Like, I think mistakes get made by either quarterback. Like, you're gonna have some momentum swinging, game changing plays, just by the nature of the defense that Wake plays. Wake has been one of the best teams in the ACC for several years in turnover margin because they force a ton of turnovers.
+5 right now, 8 takeaways.
Yep. They're there's going to be a turnover or two in this game. You just, where's the Vegas line that I can put money on that one?
Yeah.
Over under maybe one and
I'm
a half
sure
or two
there
and a
is
half.
one. I'm sure there is one. Listen, I agree with you. I think in a game where you've got two offenses that are likely going to move the ball fairly successfully, I think it could be a high scoring game. I do think turnovers are going to be a critical piece of this game, getting an extra possession for your offense. Um, where do you, I mean? I'm not going to ask you to predict a winner necessarily, but I think it's like the first one to 42 wins the ball game.
Yeah, I appreciate you not asking me to pick a winner because I hate doing that.
Yeah.
If I pick one, I'm a homer. If I pick the other, then I'm giving the guys that I have to deal with on a weekly basis some motivation. But yeah, there's an interesting stat too that I looked up last week. The winner of a Wake Forest football game has scored, I think it's more than 35 or 30. I think the starting point is last year's game that was 35-14. I think every game since then in a game that involving Wake Forest, the winner has scored at least 37 or 38 points.
Yeah.
So, if you're playing Wake Forest right now, you're probably not playing a 23-13 game.
No.
That's just not going to happen. There's going to be too many possessions. Wake's offense is too explosive to kind of bank on holding them under 30, and their defense, especially if they don't have Kalen Carson, is probably not good enough to hold anybody under, a certain number of points, maybe 20 or 30. Yeah. So yeah, this is going to be up and down, back and forth. The only mitigating factor I see there is if the winds really get bad. I always think, like, you see high scoring games in the rain. I think that's one thing that people forget is you can still throw the ball in the rain if you've practiced with a wet football all week. And the gloves they have nowadays, I don't want to sound like an old man, but like those gloves are so sticky, you can catch anything. So you can catch in the rain. It's the wind that'll put a cap on what the quarterbacks are able to do if the wind really gets up to 15 or 20 miles an hour. That's what I want to see. And I won't be down there, so it's something that, people in the stadium will have to let me know what it's like and how much the flags are whipping back and forth. But yeah, I'm with you. I think that as long as the wind doesn't get too crazy, it's going to be back and forth, high scoring, close type of game.
Yeah, and I think with that storm shifting, I don't think the wind is going to be quite the factor. They're actually talking about possibly 13 miles an hour on Saturday, so that would be it's high. I don't know. It's not gonna play the factor it very well could have earlier in the week. Last question, because I asked our guys the other day. This is the year of the quarterback in the ACC, as it probably was last year too. But Sam Hartman and Jordan Travis playing about as good as any two quarterbacks in the country, let alone the ACC. Are at least through 4 weeks, are we seeing the two best quarterbacks in the ACC go head to head on Saturday afternoon?
I think there's an argument to be made for that. There's just, the thing to me is you go into the season thinking you have, okay, Devin Leary is up there and Tyler Van Dyke has all the momentum off of last season. And then you get into the season and it's not even those guys. Like, you have Jordan Travis.
Van Dyke was benched this weekend.
Yeah, like Jordan Travis, we knew was a really good quarterback, and people still had him like in that middle tier with DJU, and it's guys that you have to see if they have it. Well, I can tell you DJ Uiagalelei has it. Jordan Travis has it. Like, even the other team I cover, Riley Leonard, was an afterthought. He was like the last quarterback named a starter in the ACC. Yep. He's got it. Like, he's in a rhythm. He's good. Drake May, nobody knew it. Like, he's the 5-star that was committed to Alabama, UNC, but they've got to fall off because he's not going to be as good as Sam Howell. He might be as good as Sam Howell.
Their defense
already
so bad. It's so bad.
So
that's what's holding him back a little bit, is that defense they got.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just it's so hard to boil it down to these are the top two, because Basic.
Listen, Jordan, Mike's done a great job of getting Jordan some pieces around him that can actually help him. The receiving core is so much better than it was the last 2 years, and Florida State's got some weapons that he can, which I think make Jordan even a more dynamic player because now he can play more within the confines of the offense, and certainly seems to be taking the next step in his development.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If you want to tell me that we're going to see the top two receivers in the conference with A.T. Perry and Johnny Wilson, I might be more inclined to agree with that.
Yeah, well, I think you might be right. Now, Florida State's had a different receiver step up basically every week. So Johnny had 2 catches last week, which is about 5th on the team. So it's about time for him to have another breakout game like he did against Louisville. Well, Conor, listen, man, I know we've taken up a lot of your time. I want to thank you for joining us, and we look forward to catching up with you again soon. But thanks for joining us on Nole, Your Enemy, and we look forward to catching up with you down the road.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Pat.
All right. Thanks, Conor.